Please welcome your moderator.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our panel. It's going to be a really interesting one, I think. We're going to be talking about disruptive developments in cancer research, and we have a fabulous panel who you can see already on screen. I'm going to take just a few minutes to set the stage for this panel. It's an exciting year for us in so many ways in cancer research, but by the same token, it's been a really hard year. With COVID-19 now 2 years on, we've had a lot of challenges, but by the same token, we've made a lot of progress in this field and looking forward to a lot more. It's an interesting time to have this conversation. On December 23rd, we will have we will recognize the signing of the National Cancer Act in 1971. And I would argue that this is one of the most, maybe disruptive, but certainly one of the most positive and high value pieces of legislation ever passed, because so many things that we've done in cancer has actually helped so many other diseases. So it hasn't, that act didn't just influence cancer, it's influenced lots and lots of other diseases. There's a lot of good news in cancer. The fundamental science that we started all the way back, even before 1971, is really paid off for us. We're in the midst of a revolution now that is based on really sequencing the human genome, but we've really carried that into cancer in a major way now with almost all of our tumors are actually either sequenced or they're going to be sequenced, and most of them have been sequenced, even the rare tumors, especially through a project that I had something to do with called the Cancer Genome Atlas. And we've done a lot with that program, and it's really contributed a lot of wonderful data. Cancer survival is increasing. It's increased about 31% from 1991 up to about 2018. However, 1 in 6 deaths globally is due to cancer. This is not just a US problem. It's obviously a global problem. And for us, while there's some good news, there's really an awful lot of very bad news, and that is our population is aging. And you know, most of you know, cancer is a disease of the aging populations. Over the age of 55, your percentage of increase in terms of cancer goes way up in terms of our population and individually. So we built an extraordinarily large and powerful enterprise. And it's an enterprise that probably is the largest ever built for a disease. I mean, to conquer a disease. And if you think about it, it probably isn't large enough. It's probably not funded well enough. It's probably, we need to do a lot more. And we're trying to do a lot more. President Biden especially has taken this on as an issue, as you all well know. And we're actually seeing the results from the moonshot and other kinds of activities that have increased NCI's budget. The original budget for the NCI in 1971 was $100 billion. And we're approaching $7 billion for the NCI's budget in 2022. So, however, if you do the numbers and you look at that, if you look at that 100 million in a time that we live in now, you'd see that it hasn't changed nearly enough. So today we need more innovation, and we need more disruptive innovation. And I would argue that we're at an inflection point in cancer. And so I think we're looking for more and more innovation and more really transformative ideas in cancer research than ever before, because we're creating massive amounts of data, and data is not information in terms of helping patients. So let me just say that I think our panel today is going to be one of the highlights of this meeting, because we have some of the absolute stars in this field who are working to change the whole trajectory of cancer in all kinds of ways. So I'm going to start and introduce them all, and then I'll come back and I'm going to have a question for each one of them. So first, Malika Davis, who is the Senior Vice President and Head of Clinical Operations of Vigene. And Malika, you can see her on your screen. I'll be back to you in just a few minutes. Upal Basu Roy is the Senior Director of Research at the Longevity Foundation, an organization that I know a lot about survivorship. Dr. Basu Roy, he's going to be, he's a very famous man already, but he's going to be a lot more famous because he is in an extraordinarily responsible position in terms of being the Senior Director of Research and the founder, actually, at a company that's heading up the overall activities we have in liquid biopsy. Sorry, I confused those two people. Let me go back. AmirAli is that person, and you'll see if you would, he's smiling now. Anyway, he's the co-founder and co-CEO of Guardant Health, and is the king, actually, of liquid biopsy. Cheryl Women is the executive director of Mayo Clinic Cancer Programs and the director of Mayo Clinic Comprehensive Cancer Center. So, Cheryl, let me start with you. You're a cancer center director, long time, came from the University of New Mexico to run the Mayo Clinic Cancer Center, as well as all of their programs. So what do you think is the biggest disruption that could occur in cancer research in the next decade? What, in your opinion, would really do more than anything else to really disrupt cancer research in a positive way so that we could increase survival and the quality of life for cancer patients?
Well, thank you, Anne, and good morning, everyone. I love that question, so thank you for targeting it to me. We all know that cancer science has increased exponentially due to the efforts of NCI, industry, many foundations that fund cancer research across our country and the world. Advances in cancer genome sequencing, precision medicine that Anne mentioned have been phenomenal, but I would argue that sequencing has largely been limited to non-Hispanic white patients. So there's still an awful lot of work to do in developing reference genomes and looking at mutation profiles in racial, ethnic minorities and underserved people across the United States and the world. That's an area of my science and something I'm very interested in. But I'm firmly convinced that each of us are living beings in the context of where we live, and the discovery of those mutations may be quite unique in different populations in the context of which we live. Certainly advances in cell-based therapies and immunotherapies are incredible. But when I think of a disruptive innovation, it's how do we get those science advances really to everyone? And I think what COVID-19 showed us is what we were up against. As I transitioned from New Mexico to Mayo, 70% of the cancer cases in New Mexico and 50% of the deaths were in tribal nations and indigenous and rural populations that did not have access to care. Patients couldn't get to our center, communities were closed for the protection of the community. Many of our patients didn't receive their treatment. So one of the most disruptive innovations that I'm really interested in now is how we actually disseminate cancer clinical trials and interventions, spanning from screening trials to therapeutic trials, and how we actually deliver cancer care at home. So one of the exciting innovations I see is a cluster of innovations at the interface of industry and academics to actually use wearable devices, remote monitoring, remotely reported patient outcomes, and virtual means to actually begin to disseminate access to clinical trials and research studies across geographic boundaries. Not only doing that for people who are well served, but people who are also underserved. In many of the meetings that Anne and I have done at NCI with cancer health disparities, we all want to jump to genomic science and high access care. But the reality is, if we could deliver better screening and care to patients so they actually had access and could complete their therapy, I think we'd see some dramatic changes in cancer survival. So thank you for that question, Anna. Something I'm very interested in.
You really hit on something that we have to come back to. And I once had a colleague who said that, advances in fundamental science and technology that is delivered unequally is of little value. And that's true. And that is a problem that we've focused on, we've tried, we're going to have to try a lot harder. And what you did in New Mexico was amazing. So I'd like to hear more about that. But let me turn to AmirAli, who I actually employed and gave his recognition to someone else. But I'll come back to that now and say that I think liquid biopsy, AmirAli, is probably one of those disruptive technologies that could be just truly transformative for so many reasons. But for those who don't know what a liquid biopsy is, tell us what it is. Tell us why you think it's so critical at this stage in the whole world of oncology.
Yeah, thank you, Anne, for having us. And it's great to be part of this prestigious panel. So liquid biopsy is effectively using a simple blood test to a large extent to get the information that typically we use to get, let's say, from a tumor tissue. And now the field has advanced so much that there are new promises of liquid biopsy that I believe would really define a better life for many of us in our community, and specifically the cancer patient, to preserve the value of the human life, to live a healthy and longer quality life. So starting from actually early detection and screening, now we are very close to the days that a simple blood test can be used in clinic or at patient site for detection of several cancer types at earlier stages when intervention and curative acts would really work much better. When you go from actually screening and early detection to go to surgery paradigm and any kind of other curative interventions, again, with a simple blood test, we can see if that surgery has done its job and the patient is cured. With a blood test, we can surveil and monitor the patients to see if the cancer is going to relapse in them. And for some of the patients that they're going to end up with progressive advanced disease, again, with a simple blood test, we can profile them genomically or look at different kind of biomarkers, not from that tumor tissue, but with a simple blood test to see what kind of treatment is going to work better or what kind of treatment is not going to work anymore. And ultimately figure out actually the best clinical trial that would match the profile of that patient for investigational trials. I believe actually blood testing would really unlock some of the access that we covered earlier. When you think about what happened in pandemic, during the first 4 months of pandemic, the rate of cancer screening dropped by 94%. And still we are not completely back to the level we are going to be. We expect to see over 10,000 more additional cancer-related deaths just because of it. And now we are talking about, instead of patients going to systems where expertise are, we can bring the system and services to the patient side and really increase the accessibility, not for just general population, but even especially for underserved population that actually typically during even pandemic, they suffered even more in order to get access to health services. We see much brighter future, not only in early detection, but like monitoring of the disease and figuring out what treatment is working for a patient with just a simple blood draw.
It's an amazing step forward. And I remember when it first came on the scene, everybody said, oh, this is never going to fly. How could you possibly pick up all of those antigens or all those biomarkers in a simple drop of blood that, and of course, you know how difficult it is to get samples when we're talking about fresh samples from patients from solid tumors. So it really is a transformative technology, and it's amazing every day. It just gets better and better. So I think we owe you all a debt of gratitude for pursuing what hasn't been an extraordinarily journey to get this particular breakthrough technology available, and it's available broadly now. So it's just totally amazing. So Malika, let me turn to you. I know that you have said that you're determined to transform clinical trials. Determined. So that's a good word. I like that word. I'm determined and have been determined for a long time to transform clinical trials. And when I was at NCI, I worked with Janet Woodcock at FDA and others to set up something called the I-SPY 2 trial group. And that is amazing. That trial is still ongoing. But it's really hard to change the industry, isn't it? I mean, so what do you think is the most important thing we could do to transform clinical trials? I mean, and ensure that patients have access to clinical trials and get these percentages up.
Yeah, It is very difficult. I mean, I've been in the industry doing clinical research for 25 years, and I'm still at it. And
We're
there's
still here.
yes, and I'm still there. Still a lot to do. I think we've done a lot in the industry, but also in the public sector, which is really good. So there are areas where we're looking at, for example, at Beijing, making sure, just like Cheryl said, making sure that the underserved population is participating in clinical trial. That is a huge challenge. We need to change that. We need to make sure that community centers, clinics, and their patients have access to clinical trials overall. And I really think that the way that we can disrupt this is by using technology. I don't think that we are there yet. COVID actually has shown to us that we can accelerate a lot of our timelines, but also that we have to be remote. We need to work more remotely, and we need to leverage technology as much as possible. I have seen too many times. So if I talk about disruption on timelines, maybe I'll start with timelines and then I can go into technology, specifically around timelines. Accelerating the approval of clinical trials right from the beginning is important. It takes too long sometimes to get these protocols approved. And COVID has, especially the active program, has shown to us that we can accelerate timelines very quickly. Regulatory processes can be accelerated, ethics committee processes, and the industry, the pharma industry and biotech company can do things better, more efficient. So that definitely is one disruption that I would like to see do better. And it's upon us in clinical operations to make sure that this happens and that we can help also our clinical centers to be as efficient and leverage technology as much as possible. I do want to give an example. I mean, you probably already know this, but in the EU, there's going to be a new EU CTR clinical trial regulation that is going to take into effect at the beginning of the year. And that will allow a protocol and a submission package to be approved in all of the EU member states at once. That is huge for us. That is really accelerating these approvals and getting patients to get to know quickly where those clinical trials are going to be approved. So that's one of them. The other one is around data, leveraging data, as Cheryl actually mentioned, which I really loved, is doing risk-based monitoring things better. During COVID, the whole challenge was how do we get investigator product to the patients? So I think really getting products to patients at their home is important. Expanding more around virtual assessments, doing clinic visits virtually is important. Doing labs, for example, doing these assessments, local labs close to where the patients live, and be able to get that information back. This is where the challenge happened. A lot of activities happen at the local site, meaning around where the patient lives, but to get the data was a real challenge, and it still continues to be a challenge. So how can
it's interesting. You made a comment that I think we're going to come back to, and that is everything changed in COVID.
Yes.
Everything having to do with clinical trials changed in COVID.
Yeah.
And we had trials up and running we had an I-SPY trial up and running in 3 months with a full FDA approval and patients being enrolled. So this is possible. I mean, so
yes,
I'd love to come back and talk about what can, say, NCI do, or where does the responsibility lie here? I mean, we can't tell companies what to do, but we can certainly help to tell FDA what to do. So any last comments on that?
Yeah, so what I want to say is, I think to me, what was fascinating is a collaboration between the public and the private sector. That to me is really key. That is how we can disrupt the industry and how we can fight cancer, frankly. Yeah. And that's the only way. Collaboration is big. We have to put all of our borders aside and come together to fight cancer. Yeah, absolutely.
That's the mantra for today, and that's the mantra, by the way, of Faster Cures. So that's an organization that really enhances and actually really moves to have collaboration happen at every level. So you, Paul, let's come to you last. And I do a lot with patient advocates, and they always say, well, why do you come to us last? Why don't you come to us first? And I say, well, I come to you last because you could take all the other stuff that's been said and tell them from a patient viewpoint, what's really important and what you have to say. And I think that you live in a space now that I have to say, and we talked about this earlier, longevity was kind of the lung cancer group that really got our attention around lung cancer. There are others, obviously, but I am amazed at the change in this disease, and even since you've been there. So what do you think happened here that is so different that hasn't happened in other diseases that were were in similar spots like GBM or pancreas? I mean, lung cancer was equally a death sentence not that many years ago. What's happened?
And thank you for the question. And thank you also for conflating me with AmirAli. That's the best compliment I could receive. So going back to
I thought you would. I think maybe you probably are earning a great deal more money too. So I just let you know that. So you might want to tell longevity.
Now, in terms of lung cancer, you brought up this very good point that even a decade ago, lung cancer was a death sentence. But I think there were sort of two pivotal points in lung cancer research. One of them was the cancer genome atlas. I think lung cancer was one of the first cancers to be sequenced through the cancer genome atlas, and that gave us a phenomenal amount of understanding of the biology of the disease. Before the cancer genome atlas, we used to think of lung cancer as a very, very homogeneous disease, but the cancer genome atlas essentially was that pivotal point when we realized that lung cancer is incredibly biomarker driven. Now, that was the biology side of things. But on the other hand, I think industry was incredibly well poised to take that information and push it through drug development. And that is why lung cancer has sort of been the poster child of precision medicine over the past, I would say, 5 to 6 years, where it's the only disease which has, at this point, I think 9 biomarker-driven targeted therapies and several immunotherapies. But I think the key piece to that also is, I think lung cancer innovation was happening at the bench, but I think lung cancer was also disrupting how we are imagining care delivery in these times. And I'll give you a few examples of how sort of lung cancer has challenged the all else in healthcare delivery. And Cheryl and AmirAli and Malika all alluded to it. But lung cancer was sort of one of those spaces which pushed CMS to think of how they are reimbursing diagnostic tests. And I'll give you an example about that. Typically, when CMS was reimbursing comprehensive biomarker testing such as NGS, there was this once in lifetime limit. But lung cancer clearly showed CMS that we cannot have this once in lifetime limit because you need to be tested at several times in your treatment journey. So that was one way in which lung cancer was pushing for innovation in the policy and in the reimbursement arena. Now, let's take clinical trial design. Again, incredibly important. Lung cancer being incredibly biomarker-driven, very heterogeneous. Lung cancer, again, was one of the pivotal disease spaces which pushed us to think of alternative trial designs, such as basket trial designs and umbrella trial designs. So all this is to say that lung cancer, yes, was lagging behind. But again, I think the landscape was incredibly poised to leverage the biology of the disease to really translate into drug development and then push us to think of innovation in the all else in the healthcare delivery system. And again, Anne, thank you so much for that question.
And it's a marvelous story. It's the one we want to see for all of these cancers.
Absolutely.
And but it is an amazing story. And it really, I think, speaks to the dedication of the scientific community to really take on these tough diseases, and also the advocacy community to work with, as you come back to collaboration, the collaborative spirit in the lung cancer community has just made a big difference, as it has in almost all the cancers. So a lot of wisdom from the four of you. So let me, this is a quick, I want to get a quick thought from you, because I know you've thought about it, but what do you think, if you look back on the COVID-19 experience over the last 2 years, what do you think that we learned from this experience that could really help us to actually do a better job with cancer and all the things that you've just talked about. So who wants to go first?
I'll take that.
Okay.
Being on the Biden Cancer Commission, or his initiative with you, and before he was elected as president, something he constantly pushed us was not sitting in our ivory towers or our industrial settings and thinking about how we disseminate science and care. And I really, really think what we learned during COVID is we could trust a patient in their home setting to actually comply with a clinical protocol. We were all shipping phase 1 drugs directly to patient homes. We were doing consent virtually. Mayo has a project now called Cancer Care at Home, where we're doing some early phase breast cancer interventions and chemotherapy using local providers. And I think this willingness to realize we're not just ivory towers, but we have to function as a broad ecosystem with a different level of providers using, allied health personnel in far and remote community settings who can hang an infusion bag and oversee an infusion just as well as my most advanced practice nurse at Mayo Clinic. It's about hubris and a little bit of arrogance. And I think what COVID taught us is we can actually do this. And I think that idea now that having the guts that we're actually going to disseminate clinical trials and genomic testing, like liquid biopsies, or delivering drugs to patient homes and trusting people to do this, we can do it. So that trust of a very different ecosystem and proof that it works was one of the most exciting things to me.
I agree. And it also says, that we can't use that as an excuse. I mean, the inability to essentially really engage with patients and have this level of trust, that's been shown to be real, and that we can actually pursue this in oncology. Any other outcomes that you would like to, AmirAli?
Yeah, I think COVID actually forced us to do some experimentation that I think in our healthcare services we were kind of avoiding, or we were not actually expediting those. Like, one of the typical examples is the value of telehealth medicine. And I think we learned a bunch in terms of where it's a good place to use telehealth and what are the areas that maybe just telehealth could reduce the quality of the care. And if I go back to the cancer screening for a moment and what happened to this COVID, listen, where was our base point? Before COVID, for colon cancer, 1 out of 3 people were not complying with screening. In lung cancer, which is the leading cause of the death, the compliance to cancer screening is just 1 out of 6 people, like 14%. It's stubbornly low. And what happened with pandemic is majority of the screening protocols almost collapsed, and 94% of the routine practices and screening tests actually went to zero. So this, I think, is an urgency call for all of us, that we need to strengthen the pillar of cancer screening and the patient care, unless we are going to have some issues in years to come. And that's why I think it's very important to really try to remove the barriers for highly innovative technologies that can really contribute tremendously to solve these problems in a highly accessible way.
So, Paul, I wanted to ask you just a quick question about this, and then look, if you have a comment, we'll take that. But I know at NCI we've been looking at what is this delay in in screening, whether it's mammography or colonoscopy or what have you, what effect is it having? Do you feel the same? Did you feel the same thing in lung cancer, that lots of people were not being treated, they were not being screened, they were not being followed? And have you done any work yet to figure out, sort of project what impact that might be having in the future?
That's a great question, Anne. And yes, we've done some work, and others have also done some work in this area of screening per se. And I think we've all landed on sort of 2 barriers that came up because of the COVID-19 pandemic. One was sort of the physician institutional barriers, and screening considered largely elective. A lot of screening centers decided to defer screening since it was an elective procedure. And on the patient side, there were enough fears about getting exposed to the virus if they visited a screening center. And so I think the combination of the institutional physician level barriers coupled with the patient barriers really, I would say, delayed lung cancer screening to a large extent. And all the speculation studies and all the guesstimations that people have done about the impact of these delays in screening, we anticipate this to extend to the next 10 to 15 years, because keeping in mind that lung cancer screening starts at the age of 50 at this point, but the median age of diagnosis is around 70. So the impact of these delayed screening will be felt for the next 10 to 15 years to come.
Yes, and that's and I think for lung cancer, it's probably more important than several other diseases, several other cancers we can think about. Malika, in terms of the kinds of work that you do globally, et cetera, what do you think that we learned from this pandemic that would help us actually to really improve the quality of life and survival in cancer patients in the future?
So in addition to everything that has been said, we've learned that from an operations perspective, we can be a lot more efficient. Actually, we started clinical trials from final protocol to a first patient in entering the clinical trial in 4 weeks. That's amazing.
It's amazing.
And all of that is because feedback from health authorities on the protocol design was very timely. There was this collaboration that was happening live, and that was really awesome. What we also learn is that we need to really be concise and specific about the data that we want to collect.
Yeah,
I think that is
that's a very interesting point.
Huge impact. And we learn this especially when, as you know, we have clinical monitors that go at the site to source data, verify the information, and make sure that everything is according to GCP. Well, during COVID, during the pandemic, nobody was traveling. Nobody was going to the clinical sites. And so having access to the data remotely was very difficult. And so how can we remotely make sure that we are following GCP, that the patients are following the protocols, was difficult for us. But what we learned is that we needed to prioritize of the data that we needed to make sure that was 100% accurate. And we were able to do this working with the clinical site remotely to do remote monitoring as much as possible. And sometimes letting go of some other data. Right. So
yeah, it's everybody has a long list of CDEs they'd like to collect, common data elements, and you can never get all those, and probably shouldn't try. But I think that was an interesting learning curve. The other thing that I find amazing is the extent to which we were able to democratize these trials. It's just amazing what was accomplished. And I think for cancer, getting back to the clinical trials issues that we have in cancer research, so much of this learning can be directly applied, and shame on us if we don't apply it. And I'm hoping that NCI will pick up on this and other organizations that actually work in this clinical trial space and really make it clear there are new models, there are new ways to do clinical trials. You can use these new models, and we all love randomized controlled trials, but that's not the only way to do a clinical trial, obviously. So we hope, and these new methods, I can tell you from experience, really do work out. If you have questions, you can ask your questions, but you have a barcode and there, and you see, hopefully. And if you have questions, put them in the chat and we'll be able to hopefully try to answer some of them toward the end of our conversation. But let me turn.
And if I could just respond to Malika's comments, which I think are profound. One of the things I think that COVID trials that got up and running so quickly across so many centers showed us, and you and I talked about this in another innovation forum a couple of weeks ago. We hate these sort of government managed projects because sometimes they're too slow and too cumbersome. But I also think many of us sitting in cancer centers or health systems across the country would really benefit from a streamlined, simplified, virtual clinical trial data infrastructure and process infrastructure where we access a protocol, open a trial, have limited data elements, and feed that. So the company or entity, private-public partnership, that could create one actually functional clinical trials web-based management system that so many of us could tap into would be a phenomenal advance. I know we tried these kind of big data, big infrastructure platform processes before, but I just don't think there are great clinical trials web-based management systems yet. And I think that would be a great advance that many of us would greatly benefit from, that would also accelerate trials and would broaden the number of entities that could participate and enroll patients in trials from sites across the world. So that's something I would love to see us take on. The second thing I would mention that really, I think, interferes with trials, again, I live this in New Mexico, I see it across the Mayo sites, is too often our eligibility criteria are just simply too restrictive. And we, again, don't trust the physician or the provider with that patient about whether a patient truly could enroll in a trial or not. We just make that too rigid. And so often the eligibility criteria, particularly for therapeutic interventional trials, really creates barriers for underserved populations who often have higher comorbidities from participating in trials at all. So anything we can do to minimize eligibility criteria, as well as data requirements, and give the physician or treating provider the judgment about whether a patient could and should benefit from a trial, that would be a better. Again, those are regulatory issues, but I think really important to think about. So thanks.
Yeah, the regulators in this space are some of our most innovative regulators ever. And so we've seen a lot of progress in this field, and I think we'll see a lot more. But I really think the eligibility issue and access are something that really has to be dealt with at every level, and certainly by every sector. AmirAli, I want to ask you a question. It's a tough question. So is precision oncology just another slogan, or do you think precision oncology is benefiting most patients at this point?
Yeah, so I think the reality is, maybe let's just go back to the lung cancer again. Since 2020, I believe there are maybe at least 15 new FDA-approved therapeutics, which a good fraction of them are biomarker-driven. So that's a live example of how precision oncology is really impacting patient lives in a very significant way. When we are thinking about earlier stage patients, post, in neoadjuvant setting or adjuvant setting, figuring out who are the patients who are at higher risk of relapse because they have some residual disease left in them versus the ones that they are disease-free, and targeting some of investigational therapeutics or even FDA-approved therapeutics to those patients. We are seeing early evidence that the probability of technical success for those assets goes much higher, and the patient benefit would be much higher. I would argue this is another great example of precision oncology. When we go to early stage screening, and when we look at the current paradigm of cancer screening, maybe again lung cancer here, which is based on some great tools like imaging, low-dose CT scan or other similar tools, which is not necessarily screening cancer, but we are screening some lumps and bumps and nodules, and then a small fraction of them are cancer, versus a new modality of cancer screening based on a blood test that you can detect 80-90% of early stage lung cancer cases with very high specificity. So I would argue that's another indication how precision oncology can bring more precision and accuracy in the way that actually we are managing these diseases, from screening all the way to treatment management and trial enrollment.
So what percentage of patients actually are getting their genomes sequenced in cancer today? Do you have an estimate?
Yeah, so actually we looked into that and we continue to monitor. It's for different cancer types, it's different. And it's really well beyond really the clinical evidence. Are we adding value by doing sequencing or not? But really, mainly I think is driven by access. who get access to this kind of technologies, which payers is paying for this kind of technologies on the commercial side. So when we look into a cancer like lung, maybe Opal has, more accurate assessment, but what we are seeing across tumor comprehensive genomic profiling or blood-based comprehensive genomic profiling, now we are at a stage that a good fraction of the patients are getting profiled at late stage. When we go to some other cancer types, even like breast cancer and colon cancer and gastric cancers of the world, that percentage is very low. So, typically even some of the major cancers, less than 10% or low teens of the cases are getting actually comprehensively sequenced. So we are missing a lot of opportunity to impact lives, not because of we don't have evidence we can help them, but different barriers we have in the field that really still many patients are not getting access to these innovative technologies.
Yeah, we're always coming back to access, aren't we? I mean, it's interesting. If you think about, I can give you a list of technologies today that are just mind-numbing. I mean, digital pathology, what we've talked about now with liquid biopsy, advances in imaging that are so stunning, all the way to three-dimensional imaging, which is coming. And if you look at the big data space, the application of artificial intelligence and decision science, which, it's just an amazing array of technology. We're almost at an inflection point in terms of the amount of data we have in oncology today. But about 2% of it's been analyzed, if that. And so, I guess my next question for you all is, if we are at this inflection point and we have, by the way, this data isn't all great data, by the way. It's, I think to Malika's point, there is a difference in the kind of data and the quality of data. And so how do you think we take this advance that AmirAli just talked about, which is we can easily produce a terabyte of data on a patient today, easily. So now you're talking about, amounts of data that we never envisioned. But how do we leverage this time and this opportunity in ways that we've not been able to do yet? And I'll tell you my bias, and then you can tell me yours. I don't think we have any way of organizing our data until we bring in theoretical mathematicians, physicists, engineers, people who know how to do this. These are people who, who we've tried to engage over these last, it's the last decade really, to help us to think more about humans as three-dimensional in time and space kinds of individuals, not people who are, flat on a, we're talking about a piece of paper when we're doing calculations. But so what do we have to do to change where we are now when we have tons of opportunity, lots of data, lots of technologies, and I think a real opportunity in precision medicine that just is unparalleled. So what do you think is the next big step that we should take to actually go to the next breakthrough, if you would, in oncology? Paul, do you have a comment on that? Have you thought about it? I know you're thinking about it in lung cancer.
And before we even sort of go towards how do we manage data, I want to also push us to think about some of the upstream issues we are dealing with about the kind of data we have at hand. And going back to AmirAli's point about the issue of access to some of these innovative technologies that generate data, I think we are still lagging behind in that. And thinking of all the data that we have at our disposal right now, do we consider it to be a complete data set? And in my perspective as a patient advocate, I don't think we have a very complete data set at our disposal, because a lot of people, a lot of patients, especially from racially underrepresented communities, they are not represented in these data sets. And I've heard a lot of discussions about AI for clinical trial selection, AI for patient selection, but we all know that an AI is as good as the training data set. So if the training data set is incomplete, then I still feel that we are lagging behind. So I feel that we get into this catch-22 situation that we talk about good data, but in my mind, till we have a complete data set, till we've solved some of the access issues that lead to the data generation, I think we'll sort of go round and round in circles.
So any other thoughts? I know, Cheryl, you've worked in the in a space that's close to my heart, nanotechnology, for drug delivery. It's also, again, producing a lot of data. What do you think we can do about, getting to the analytics and getting to the next phase of precision oncology?
I keep listening to Paul's concern about access, and I'll be the one to be politically incorrect and say, it's time for universal healthcare insurance in the United States. That's the only way we're going to assure that the technologies and tools that we want to deliver really get to all the patients that deserve it. Also, federal law to really mandate access to clinical trials and ensure support patients who are on clinical trials is operative in about 18 in the United States, but certainly not all of them. So I think legislation around access to care, universal healthcare coverage, legislation that mandates support for patients participating in clinical trials and research studies are really essential. I was thrilled to hear Malika's comment about EU working together, to create uniform protocols that open across country and geographic boundaries. We need those kinds of policy and infrastructure decisions. But as we look at nanotechnology, the thing I'm really excited about are all the wearable patient devices and remote nano means to do testing through infrared or visual means. That means we really could have patients in remote locations and we're actually monitoring their vitals. I know, again, I mentioned Mayo, but in the Cancer Care at Home project, that was preceded by doing wearable devices to monitor people with, unstable cardiac conditions, patients in renal failure, and it just works dramatically well. So I'm very excited about the interface of optical engineering, nanoengineering for sort of the wearable devices and tools we can truly create for remote drug delivery, remote patient monitoring. I just think that is an incredible opportunity where technology can truly overcome some of the disparities we're talking about.
Yeah, and that's not often cited as a way to actually improve access. And I think it's an incredibly important one. Malika, I want to ask you a question about, so you mentioned earlier, the idea of sort of globalization of data and, how we can use that approach to get, sort of better answers for our patients. So what are you doing actually in that space at your company right now in terms of, looking at this on a global basis, this problem?
Yeah, so we, first and for all, we are looking at making sure that we have good data privacy policies. And that is something that is also important for us. So it is about getting the data, but it's also making sure that the data is not shared across the world. So that's one thing that we are looking at very, very carefully. The other one is, we haven't done it yet, but we are actually starting to do it, is to find a way to get access to the different data sets that are available at the cancer centers. And this is very complicated and very difficult, as also Cheryl mentioned. The only way could be to have a universal, healthcare data set system. But also, as you mentioned, Dr. Barker, the mathematicians, the engineers, if they could only come together and find a way of building an interface between what is available today out in all of the clinical centers versus what we need, would really help. So it's almost like a translation platform, if I can say. That could be.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's a really good idea, actually.
That could be, that could be really, really good. So what we
maybe let me follow up on that. So I like that. So how would you? It's almost a registry approach.
Yes.
Globally, that would be something that could be done, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's doable. That's not an intractable problem.
Exactly, because globally, in the United States or even around the world, every center has their own way of looking at their data, their own data set, their own, their own electronic medical records, right?
Yes.
Everything is different.
Their own data model. Their own data
data model.
standards. Yes,
Exactly.
everything is their own.
Exactly. Their own definition, which is also something else. So maybe we can start thinking about as simple as local labs. When in cancers, trials, we always, think about, okay, can we centralize the labs, or can we, use the local labs? And that is a huge challenge of us. So how can we get that information as quickly as possible, and maybe going through that interface, we would be able to get it faster. So
Yeah,
that's an
I
idea.
I think that's a really intriguing idea, and I think that needs to be followed up on. But as always, in a panel like this, you need 5 hours, to discuss these issues. We don't have 5 hours, but I want to raise an issue that I just want to know what you're thinking about this, and is, thanks in large measure to our progress in the omics, the multi-omics world, we are now able, at least certain companies are now able to offer pre-cancer tests. So we can tell you, in theory, I mean, the trials are still being done, but some of these tests are already approved. We can tell you that you're going to get 30 cancers or 20 or 5, or you might get in your lifetime. What in the world are we going to do with this kind of information? And AmirAli, I'm not blaming you for this. Understand, you didn't do this one. So what is it? What are we going to do in terms of counseling people once? Should these be broadly available? I guess, and if so, how are we going to counsel people? I know you've thought about it.
Yeah, great question. The word that comes to my mind about all these topics is awareness, and making sure we are raising awareness in a right way. And I think that's even maybe connected to the data conversation earlier, that we are pleased with some of the progress that we are seeing even on the EMR provider side, that there is some raised awareness that maybe some new upgrades on their infrastructure would help to extract real world evidence. And just that raised awareness is making the future of this data conversation brighter. Now, on the genetic test or detection test, I think we need to raise the awareness in an appropriate way, that there are some genetic tests out there that can give risk-based kind of information, that is this patient or individual have a higher probability of developing breast cancer, ovarian cancer, pancreatic cancer, colon cancer. We are at a stage that we know some of the basic science around them, and they are approved tests that we can highlight those elevated risk factors. On the other side, there are some tests that not just, not necessarily talk about the probability and risk factors, but they do detection and they talk about actuality. Are you disease-free or you have disease? If you have disease, what kind of disease you have? So I think our job on the private side and public side really is to make sure we are hand-to-hand raising awareness about these tests in a proper way. And there are barriers in this field that I believe by increasing awareness can get resolved. When we talked about access on the payer side, when we are talking about, I think some of the stuff that people really do not know, that for instance, we have United States Prevention Services Task Force that has the authority to make sure people get access to no out-of-pocket cost for preventive tests, preventive therapeutics, preventive behavioral changes, but they are so underfunded that they typically meet every 6 to 8 years. Every 6 to 8 years, right? So,
what this smacks of is preemptive oncology, and everybody on this panel knows that you get a lot of opportunities to get cancer in your lifetime. Fortunately, your immune system is in there fighting the whole time. It would be so good, though, if we could find the really bad cancers early. That would be and I suspect these tests, at least in the early going, are going to find those, and it probably will not prove much of an advantage, I think, for the really bad ones. We're going to run out of time, but I want to give all of our panelists a final opportunity here. And here's a question. So an idea that you've had, and you've just maybe it's a secret idea and you don't want to share it, but now's your chance, because a lot of people are listening and maybe somebody will go do it. But what is your big idea for how we can disrupt cancer in a positive way that will actually have the biggest impact on the most people, have the biggest impact on survival and quality of life for all cancer patients? And that's assuming everyone has access with Cheryl's model in universal healthcare. So you have about a minute each. So you, Paul, let's start with you.
I think, Anne, if I had my secret wish list, and the top item on that wish list would be data harmonization. When I say data harmonization, collection of data in a fashion that it's harmonized and utilizable, and data sharing. I think those are the two biggest roadblocks
Those are right at the top of my list. Malika, what's yours?
So absolutely. In addition to that, creating a loop of data exchange between the community centers and the big cancer centers, I think to me is something that
we're all on that page. AmirAli, what? You're
say,
such an innovator. So what do you think?
I would say seeing a committee that their charter and their authorities to make sure when there are proven innovation, which has net population health benefit and positive outcome benefit, they can make sure people get access to them, not after 5 to 7 years, but after maybe a few months.
That's amazing. I want to come back and ask, I want to ask you something about that. So Cheryl, what's your favorite?
I'll go quickly so you can get back to AmirAli. So my favorite is the use of virtual tools and platforms to really disseminate care. And I love the idea of Malika using the academic cancer centers or large centers and health systems as hubs that actually create networks out through community settings. But then we need to have those communities be able to communicate with other communities through very common data sharing portals and networks. That ecosystem would be beautiful to create.
So, AmirAli, I want to ask you a question about regulatory issues, and just very quickly, is there a particular aspect of the regulatory system that could change, especially for biomarkers and diagnostics, that would really make a huge difference in all that we're talking about? Because everything we're talking about in terms of therapy, early detection, monitoring, it's all going to come back to biomarkers. And if you're on the diagnostic space, the diagnostics to actually begin to not just determine that you have cancer, but to tell us a lot more about it.
So actually, we are very pleased with a bunch of changes in FDA. We have the first FDA-approved, liquid biopsy CDX test for comprehensive genomic profiling. So we've been working with the agency for years. But one thing that I think would really help, although they are doing a great job, is getting maybe a page from the way pandemic worked to extent, with some of the up and downs even, how some of the devices got EUA access and some of the regulatory bars for them, and continuous kind of oversight on those devices, what works, what doesn't work, and maybe expand that to other life-saving opportunities out there, right? Sometimes these review cycles are very lengthy. And I think what maybe is connecting to that is really the level of funding of agency versus they are not interested and they are slow. I think it's just related to how much budget and resources they have access to. But they need, yes, I think, a different kind of classification for life-saving opportunities in the field.
I think that's an extraordinarily great idea. We have a new FDA commissioner who's going to be going before his hearing before long. I think most of you know him, and I think he will hear us. And I know he's the kind of person that will actually listen. And I think he will make even more changes in what is already a very progressive regulatory environment for the FDA. I want to thank our panelists, you, Paul, Malika, AmirAli, Cheryl. You're just a great combination of intellects, and I really do appreciate your sharing this hour with us, but more than that, your talents. And I think we've covered a lot of ground today. I will say this, I think we are at an inflection point in cancer. I think we are not much different than maybe they were in 1971 Cancer Act. Tons of opportunity, some apparently intractable problems that can be solved. So thank you all again, and make sure you get vaccinated and stay safe. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you for having us.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you for
Yeah.
having. Bye.